Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Wilson Center on behalf of the Mexico Institute and the Canada Institute. My colleague Chris Sands, the director of the Canada Institute. I'm Andrew Redmond. I'm the director of the Mexico Institute. It's really our pleasure to have you all here live or virtually over the web. On today's International Women's Day, we want to recognize that. Admittedly, our panel is not terribly reflective of that, but nevertheless, we are aware of, of the day, and we will talk a little bit later on about some issues that relate to women. COVID-19 has taught us many things, perhaps none more important than the significance of global supply chains. As the pandemic began, the need for PPE and for ventilators, for example, underscored the challenges facing governments. How do you move the things you critically need from where they're manufactured to where they need to be used? At the same time, efforts to stop the spread of the pandemic led to complete or partial border closures that interrupted global supply chains and global manufacturing. And we certainly saw that here in North America, where our three countries had different definitions of what was an essential product and for who and what could cross our shared borders. The development of vaccines to combat the virus as the pandemic progressed created yet another series of challenges, especially in light of the stringent storage requirements for some of them. And finally, today we're facing, among other things, a global shortage of semiconductors, which is essential to the manufacture of so many of the products that we rely on every day. That's just yet another reminder of our interdependence and of the need for goods to be moving around the world. Now, more than 2 years into the pandemic, as we hopefully return to normal, the constant is that we're going to remain dependent on the movement of goods, on those supply chains across borders and around the world in order to restore economic growth. In many countries, this will require reconnecting or connecting for the first time small and medium-sized enterprises to the global economy in order to help promote the prosperity that we all want for our families, for employees, and for our communities. And though we're all more attuned, I think, now to the need to move primary, intermediate, and finished goods, most of us, aside from global logistics professionals and customs professionals, of course, probably still don't think as much as we should about how those goods cross borders and what is the role of the customs agencies in making sure that they move smoothly. And it's also important to recognize that not only are customs agencies required or responsible for helping legitimate products cross the borders quickly and efficiency, to respond to just-in-time production, et cetera, customs services also have to make sure that the goods that we don't want, the illegal drugs, weapons, counterfeit goods, for example, that those don't cross the border. So to help us think more about those issues and learn specifically how the World Customs Organization, through its new strategic plan, can help enhance efficiency, promote harmonized regulations, and share best practices, we're delighted to welcome to the Wilson Center Ricardo Trevino, the Deputy Secretary General of the World Customs Organization. Following a presentation from the Deputy Secretary General, Chris and I will moderate a question and answer session, including questions from our audience, both those here with us in person and those of you watching online. If you are online and would like to pose a question, please email it to mexico@wilsoncenter.org or tag us on Twitter @Mexico Institute. Our distinguished guest this morning, Deputy Secretary General Ricardo Trevino, has spent over 20 years in the public sector in Mexico and since 2018 in his current role at the WCO. As Deputy Secretary General, he follows up on the correct implementation of the WCO strategic plan, overseeing and coordinating efforts made by the organization's 3 directorates: compliance and facilitation, tariff and trade affairs, and capacity building. Prior to assuming his current role, he served from 2015 to 2018 as Mexico's General Administrator of Customs, a presidential appointment requiring Senate confirmation. During his tenure, Mr. Trevino promoted digitalization of customs procedures as well as cooperation with other border agencies and with the customs administrations of Mexico's main trading partners. In addition, he ensured that the effectiveness of Mexico's risk alert system was enhanced through the implementation of technology and data analysis with a positive impact on revenue collection. He also promoted Mexico's international cooperation through the development of collaboration agreements, information sharing mechanisms, and joint inspection programs. He also served as the WCO Vice Chair for the Americas and Caribbean region, and in this capacity coordinated the first ever regional strategic plan to promote and implement WCO tools and instruments. From 2013 to 2015, Mr. Trevino was Administrator General of Evaluation and Internal Affairs for the Federal Tax Administration Service in Mexico, known as SAT, where he was responsible for developing actions to strengthen integrity and transparency in customs procedures. Ricardo Trevino holds a bachelor's degree in finance from the Instituto Tecnológico de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey, otherwise known as Monterrey Tech, or Tec de Monterrey, in Mexico, and a master's degree in global banking and international finance from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Deputy Secretary General, thank you so much for being here this morning. We're really looking forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you for this invitation. Thank you to the Wilson Center for organizing this event, to the Mexico Institute, the Canada Institute. Andrew, Chris, thank you very much for this, what I hear, the first public hybrid event in nearly 2 years. So I'm happy to be piloting this new model of public event here, and I hope it is a success. Thank you everyone for being here, present or connected through the website. And I will just start by acknowledging as well the International Women's Day and acknowledging all those women that serve as role model in their effort and dedication constantly, and for some of them present today, thanks a lot for this. Now, I will start immediately by touching upon what today I was invited to present, getting accustomed to the new normal border customs in the age of COVID-19. And to do that, I first decided to briefly introduce a little bit what is customs' strategic role for those that might not be familiar with it. So the customs strategic role has evolved really during the past few decades. Of course, its genesis, its main purpose was about revenue collection of import taxes. And then it has been evolving, but these new objectives that have been added to customs is that they have been added. It's not replacing one over the other, and therefore that makes, of course, the customs role a quite challenging one. After having revenue collection as its main objective, of course, we had also the role of protecting the economic interests through this era of protectionism a few decades back. Then the protection of society came as a main objective, especially protecting societies from health or other risks, the fight against drug trafficking, firearms, and so on. Then came our role to promote economic development through the facilitation of trade, and most recently, of course, our role as a national security agency as a first line of defense by combating terrorism and assuming a security role. So all these functions, which at the same time we have to coordinate with other entities, private and public, makes the role of customs a strategic one. We are in constant communication with ports, with shipping companies, with carriers, banks, brokers, and other government agencies such as agriculture, health, trade and commerce, police, immigration, and others. So the role of customs, what I wanted to show in these two slides is its complexity and its strategic relevance for any national strategy. Now, regarding the function that customs have gone through in the last couple of years during the pandemic, well, customs have played a major role. we have not stopped, and this is something that as well needs to be acknowledged. People in the front line that even during the beginning, the outbreak of this pandemic, they have been working there, they have been risking and so on, by non-stopping and really trying to facilitate, on the one hand, the essential goods, facilitating the flow of goods like food, medicines, and of course vaccines. And in the other hand, also through protecting society by detecting those fake medicines and counterfeit, and those actions in which the organized crime has been infiltrating. All these, of course, as well, at the same time, in many places, by securing the stability of public finances through a fair revenue collection. So these efforts have been based in three main components: an effective communication with partners, with the private sector, with economic operators, through partnerships with other government agencies, with other customs in the world, and through upgrading, upscaling our capacities. Of course, the pandemic has brought upon us different challenges that we have to face by upscaling the capacity of our infrastructure, but mainly as well of our people. So again, this has been an important role for customs during the pandemic, and during these years, WCO has contributed, assisted its members through the publication of best practices in our website, through a publication of list of essential goods together with the World Health Organization, in which we could, through our harmonized system, codify such goods to facilitate its flow, among other actions that have been performed. Now, to see what is going to happen in the aftermath of the pandemic, we also have to provide a context of where we're standing. And first of all, the global economic recovery that we are looking forward to. And this slide is showing a little bit the estimates of what will happen during this year, the estimates of growth, which of course it's decelerating if we compare with the last year. However, we're still growing. And in more detail, we can see by regions here, the world will be estimated to grow 4.4% this year. And by regions, we see here, for instance, the US 4%, and other regions that are all performing positively, but still with less growth than what happened in 2021. Now, this still, again, gives us a context of global economic recovery, and given that one of the main drivers of this economic recovery is trade, we have to look into what are the estimates of cross-border trade. In here, the WTO is estimating that the trend will be in line with the expectations. Therefore, there will be still some growth of trade in the coming months. And we see here as well, as part of their numbers, that exports and imports will keep their tendency towards an increase. You can see there by exports, of course, there are regions that are really, basing their recovery much more on international trade, like the Asian economy. Now, we have to consider within this economic growth also other factors. Inflation, of course. We have seen inflation rising in the last few months. Basically, there are several factors, but we can say one of them is the disruption of supply chain on the one hand, and on the other hand, the price of energy that has been increasing in the last few months, that will push the prices still a bit further forward into what we expect in the rest of the year. Other factors are still to consider. the rate of vaccination, in the different rates of vaccination in the different parts of the world. We still see, for instance, in the African continent that there will be some challenges regarding the access to vaccines, and therefore this is something in which we need to focus as well as part of our recovery. Tourism will not come back yet, still not this year, will not come back to pre-pandemic levels, although it is increasing, but this is still something that needs to be considered, and that is part of the context in which we are living. And of course now other factors such as what is happening in Ukraine, where we see a big migration level of people not seen for some time, and that will probably impact as well in the movement of goods on the one hand, but also in probably in more inflation through the energy prices moving still to the high end. So therefore, under this context, what are the trends in trade? Well, we see, of course, one of the trends in international trade is the use of new technology. And here, a survey of the World Economic Forum, in which the WCO participated actively, we see that some of these technologies will impact trade. Technologies like Internet of Things, like digital payments, e-commerce platforms, of course, cloud computing, 5G. These technologies are part of the new trends that we need to adapt in the coming years, and that will impact, hopefully positively, in international trade. Another trend that has been identified, of course, and all these trends probably were already in there before the pandemic, however, they are being accelerated now in the aftermath, and the e-commerce is one of them. We can see here the increase in retail e-commerce sales worldwide, and we can see how the change, the variation towards increasing of e-commerce has been already constant, but once 2021, after the pandemic, it has even increased more. So we expect this to keep increasing. This comes with a lot of pressure to customs, of course, in a way of more volume of operations, more and different actors that were not involved in international trade before, actors that customs have no information of, and therefore the risk analysis is part of what we need to start solving, and this is, of course, something that we need to face through the use of technology as well. Another trend is the greening of supply chains. We have seen that society is, of course, demanding that we recover back and we recover better. And to do that, we need to be in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And therefore, we need to find a way and how customs and how supply chains can contribute to separating the increase of global emissions with the economic growth. That is something that traditionally have been going hand in hand, and therefore we need to find a way to compensate this and find a way to keep growing, but without affecting our planet. And another and fourth trend that has been identified is increased implementation of regional trade agreements. We can see in this slide how the increase in the last year has been dramatically there compared with the previous years. So we are seeing more regional agreements, meaning as well that supply chains are being regionalized in order to diversify risks and in order to minimize them as well, having suppliers in a shorter distance in order to find this supply chain resilience. That is something that now we are, many of us, talking about every day in the trade sector. So what would be customs' response to these major trends that we have identified? Well, we need to work on our procedures, to modernize them through more transparency, to make them predictable for economic operators. We need to use new technologies. We have to base our processes in data analytics, in automation, and we also need to strengthen our cooperation, not only customs to customs cooperation, but also with other border agencies and the private sector. All these would provide us a much more effective risk management, which is basically the backbone of customs tasks. Now, with procedures comes, of course, the need to have sometimes legal reforms to adopt the best practices. With technology comes the need to invest, to find ways to solve automation, to use data. With cooperation, we need a willingness to collaborate and to start exchanging information. And these, of course, present challenges. Challenges in the way of, first of all, political support to perform such legal reforms and to overcome some collaboration issues among actors. And on the other hand, a strong investment needed in infrastructure, technologies, and of course, upscaling people's skills. These challenges that are being faced by customs are part of what WCO needs to focus on. And the WCO is assisting its members with these challenges. And for those that are not very familiar on what the WCO, the World Customs Organization, is about, well, we are the only international organization 100% focused on customs matters. We are the international voice for customs, and we have 184 members representing almost 99% of trade. What we do here is to set international standards, aiming to harmonize international trade. We foster cooperation through collaboration agreements, events, and joint operations, and we build capacity of our members for a better implementation of our tools, but also for their organizational development. And some of our tools are well known, such as the harmonized system, the revised Kyoto Convention, the safe package, and the e-commerce cross-border framework of standards, among others, which are part of our portfolio of solutions and portfolio of tools that we provide our members with. And we're working on our new strategy precisely to update these tools. On the one hand, our new strategy towards 2025, which is in line with our mission to provide leadership, guidance, and support for customs administrations in their main objectives, which are trade facilitation, revenue collection, and protection of society. And we do this, as I said, through the development and update of our standards, which is part of our main and core business. Our main priority is to keep updating, to keep these standards available and valid for our members on the one hand, through joint operations as well, to foster cooperation and through building capacity for a better implementation of these tools. And we have identified, together with our members, 3 core focus areas which will take our tasks in the next 3 years. One of them is technology and innovation. These focus areas are in line precisely with the challenges that we have just mentioned, the challenges and the trends that we have identified. And basically, technology and innovation is about, again, reducing the technological gap among our membership and about using data that customs own. Data in order to take decisions, in order to raise visibility of customs as well. On the other focus area is how customs can contribute to the greening of the supply chains, how we can engage with the circular economy, and how we can incentivize green supply chains through the right policies. And the third focus area is about the governance of the organization. We believe here, together with members, that in order to provide and improve our way forward, we need to change business as usual. We need to change the way we work within the organization and the way we engage with society as well. And therefore, governance is something in which we're going to focus in the coming years. So this is what I had today presented, and I'm open to any question and hopefully be able to answer. Thank you very much to everyone again.
much. I really appreciate your joining us. Have I got the microphone done right? Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us, Ricardo. That was a wonderful presentation, very comprehensive. We're going to walk through questions. I'm going to turn to Andrew to start us off, but I want to say one thing about our hybrid world. One is that if you're in the room, just say hi so I can see a hand, and we'll be glad to call on you. And if you're watching online, the way to let us know you have a question is to either email it to mexico@wilsoncenter.org or to tag us on Twitter at Mexico Institute. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Andrew, for the first question.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Ricardo. That was a really great presentation. As Chris said, really comprehensive, and I think a lot of questions come to my mind and probably to our audience as well. Let me start with one that is perhaps top of mind as countries around the world talk about how to respond to the invasion of Ukraine, and there are lots of conversations about sanctions and restricting the flow of certain goods, et cetera. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how the WCO, if the WCO engages, or how it would engage in issues of that nature?
Thank you, Andrew, for this very relevant question, interesting one. Oh.
Yep.
I pressed it, and so it was turned on already. Thank you, Andrew, for this very interesting and relevant question. Basically, the WCO as a technical organization, of course, is together with members have been trying to keep away from any political position and abiding to our convention and our legal framework. Therefore, it is up to the council. Members integrate this council, the 184 members, and it is up to the council to take any resolution forward regarding this important matter. Of course, we are looking at these facts with the most higher concern. And we have been as well in touch with the Belgian authorities, who are the depository of the convention of the WCO, and therefore taking forward the necessary measures in order to react to these awful facts that we are looking at. Thank you.
I'm going to go straight to the audience. We have a question from Dr. Eugene Laney.
I'm Eugene Laney, the President and CEO of the American Association of Exporters and Importers. We're former members of the private sector group of the WCO. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. My question centers around 21st century customs. And so, as you're aware, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection has endeavored to sort of create a 21st century framework for customs. And a lot of it, some would say, focuses a lot on enforcement and less on facilitation. And so my question for you is that because of COVID, we've been unable to go out on the road and go around the world and see how other countries are, looking at 21st century customs. Can you talk a little bit about how other countries are viewing how to prepare for 21st century customs? And then a follow-up question is, we're celebrating the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. How is that agreement going to help a lot of those countries to get some of the tools that you identified, like technology and those types of things?
Well, thank you very much, Eugene, for your question and for being here today. Well, I think what we are looking at as the future of customs, and as I stated, one of the main trends is to adopt technology solutions, to have a real intensive use of these new technologies. And these new technologies will allow us not only to enforce, but to facilitate at the same level. I don't see the need anymore, at least with the available technologies currently in the world, to talk about this balance of technology, of facilitation and enforcement because balancing means that we sacrifice something to achieve the other one in some respect. And I don't think we need to sacrifice anything. We cannot afford sacrificing neither facilitation nor enforcement. Currently, we have to achieve both 100%. And the use of new technologies is what will allow us to really go forward on this path. So this is what we're promoting, the use of technology, the use of data analytics, and therefore this way we can, of course, complement the efforts of our sister organization, WTO, in the implementation of the facilitation agreement, which, as we all know as well, most of the provisions in this agreement land on customs procedures, and therefore is very much in line as well with our revised Kyoto Convention, which we promote actively. Therefore, I think that currently we can strongly promote both enforcement, facilitation, through the use of technologies.
We have a question also in the room. Wait till the mic is coming, and for those of you watching, don't forget to send your questions in. We're not ignoring you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie Seguin, Assistant Commissioner for the Office of International Affairs, Customs and Border Protection. First, before I ask my question, I'll acknowledge my fellow member in the audience's question insofar as 21st century modernization. Thank you very much for bringing up that topic. It is a focus for CBP in the area of trade, and I'll echo Mr. Trevino's comments insofar as our focus on really looking at technology to both facilitate trade and increase enforcement. Certainly, members of trade stakeholders will have the opportunity to provide their feedback through various forums, and I'm happy to further discuss. But to Mr. Trevino, thank you so much for your presentation. As a member of the WCO community, we're very appreciative of your efforts in, spearheading the strategic plan. And certainly in defining the 3 focus areas that you mentioned today. Given the wide membership participation, I think 184 countries, as you just mentioned, and the varying interests and perhaps developments, can you just talk about what are some of the challenges that perhaps the WCO would have in coming up with guidelines that suits all of its members? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your question, Debbie, and good to see you here, and thanks for coming today. Yes, this is one of the challenges for the WCO, having a diversity of different levels of development among our membership, 184, and this is a truly global organization, and that's what also makes it a very relevant one. But of course, it comes with its challenges. I would say, as any other decision that we make within the organization, which is by consensus, we try to find the best way forward in our discussions with members, trying to adopt the best practices. The guidelines that we come up with are usually those guidelines that meet at least the minimum level of feasibility for our membership. And this is usually achieved through discussions of our working bodies. Now, I talked about the trend there regarding the regionalization of supply chains. It might be worth exploring as well within the organization a way of regionalizing some of our guidelines, or setting different types of customizing our tools among the membership in order for them to be even more effective. Of course, we acknowledge as well that within these different levels of capabilities among our membership, there are those that require little or sometimes non-technical assistance in the implementation of our tools. However, there are others that do require some guidance and assistance, and that's why sometimes we focus our efforts also with these members. This again is part of our international collaboration and our current framework that needs to constantly be improved as according in our new strategic plan. Thanks.
Andrew.
Thanks. I'm going to go. We have a question that came in from our online audience, and then we'll come back to the room, I promise. And it's actually, it's a great follow-on to something you were just talking about, Ricardo. Justin Margolis pointing out that this event was co-organized, co-sponsored by the Canada and Mexico Institutes, asks Ricardo if you could share your perspective on the USMCA, the U.S. Canada-Mexico agreements, new customs and trade facilitation chapter.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. I think the North American relationship is constantly improving. There are some challenges, of course, that we see in the implementation of this chapter. However, overall, I think it's a positive one. It's a positive result out of negotiations, agreements, and it's a way of strengthening the region. At the end, we go back to the issues of regionalizing supply chains, of really promoting regional strengths, and I think the agreement, this regional agreement, really supports the idea of strengthening supply chains and production within the region. So, in my view, it's a positive one. It's a challenging one in many aspects, but it's still positive. Thank you.
Back to you, Chris. Oh, back to me. Excellent. Question in the room? Yes, please.
I don't know if I need to turn this on or not. I'm Ellen McLean. I'm the Vice President of InterVistas Consulting. But 41 years ago, I started with U.S. Customs Service, and I retired in 2019 before taking on this position. And so two of the things that you mentioned sort of struck a chord. One was private sector collaboration, and the other was e-commerce. And so I was wondering what the WCO might be focusing on with respect to industry-led solutions for combating like counterfeits and unhealthy products that are moving through e-commerce into various countries, and what those industry-led solutions might be. And one of the reasons I mention this is CBP has acknowledged that it doesn't have the resources to combat that flood of violative items coming through e-commerce at a $1.50 a piece kind of thing, right? So I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellen. Well, on the one hand, we have our private sector consultative group, which represents, it's represented through our 6 regions there, and we're constantly in touch with them for, on the one hand, identify possible challenges and bottlenecks in the flow of goods, and therefore being able to collect these concerns and reflect them in the discussions that our members are having to define and improve some of our tools. Regarding this private sector consultative group, they are very active in some of our main working groups, like the e-commerce working group back then, when the definition of our framework of standards was determined. We had a very active participation from the PSEG, the private sector consultative group, and also in our SAFE working group, which is the one discussing everything around the SAFE framework of standards, which is basically focused on security of supply chain. within this safe framework of standards, one of the figures, one of the tools that the WCO promotes is the AEO, the Authorized Economic Operator. And we have very active participation from the private sector there. Now, the new review of the AEO is focusing actually on e-commerce supply chains. So we expect, and this is part of the deliverables of the new strategy that we're proposing, is to expect a definition and some of the best practices in order to implement this AEO figure into the e-commerce. This would allow us, of course, to have, let's say, certificated or acknowledged operators that would have benefits because they have demonstrated they are following some security norms and they are following a way of having safe supply chains. And they would have some benefits when they operate with the cross-border e-commerce operation. So therefore, this is part of what we are focusing on in the strategy. We are, of course, closely as well working with the PSEG in other matters. During the pandemic, for instance, personally, I met basically every week virtually with the private sector in order to identify where we could see some of the bottlenecks in the flow of goods, and that gave us the possibility to really give some precision shots in some of the issues that were identified. So it's collaboration, communication, and this closeness with the private sector that is really working.
Excellent. We have a question from Nicole Bivens-Collins.
Yes, hi, Nicole Bivens-Collinson. I'm with Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg. And I just wonder if you could maybe comment on what you think the pandemic or what impact the pandemic may have had on customs services for achieving some of their trade facilitation goals, as in accepting digital signatures, accepting digital paperwork, even for CBP, making some changes into what documentation they would accept electronically versus actual paper documents.
Well, thank you very much for that question. Of course, that varies a lot depending on each custom administration, and there might be some good examples in one or another. But there are some, for instance, I think positive ones in a way that, of course, at the outbreak of the pandemic and given the uncertainty back then, of course, many things came to a halt, and this, of course, disrupted not only supply chains but also the efforts of some customs administrations in facilitating the flow of goods. But once things started already going again and flowing gradually, we saw that some improvements were made regarding facilitation in the way that many customs administrations adopted new procedures, automated some of them, in a shorter time than they were supposed to. This meant that, in a way, the pandemic showed us that we were ready to facilitate some of the procedures already, and that what we were lacking was just a willingness sometimes to do it, and this happened, I think, in many parts in the world. This was an eye-opener in many aspects, and a clear example was, for instance, the extension precisely for AEO operators, the authorized economic operators, in which many customs administrations were requiring a physical visit to extend this accreditation, and since the pandemic didn't allow physical visits, everything was done virtually. And this was a very positive impact in many countries regarding the facilitation of trade and the facilitation of accrediting economic operators.
Let me take a moment here, because we have been talking about customs officers, and many of them couldn't telework during the pandemic. They were frontline workers, they were essential workers that kept things going, and no point other than to say I think all of us are grateful for their service, because it really made a difference in keeping the economies going, and hope you'll pass that on to your colleagues. Can I ask you a question? A week ago here, we had Canada's Minister for International Trade, Small Business and Economic Development, Mary Eng, here, and she talked about the Canadian government's priority for inclusive trade and bringing more women, more small businesses, Indigenous communities, other groups into the mainstream of trade. Does the World Customs Organization relate to that? Are there things that can be done or that you would like to see done to make trade a more inclusive prospect for emerging economies and developed ones as well?
Sure, thank you. One other aspect that we have identified within our needs in the supply chain is precisely to promote this inclusiveness. We see that the benefits for the economic operators, the authorized economic operators, sometimes are unreachable for small and medium businesses. It is too costly for them to get accredited, and the benefits that are offered are not compensating these costs enough. So what we're proposing as well is to review these aspects, to set a floor for small and medium enterprises for real benefits, concrete benefits, once they are accredited on the one hand, but also to keep the requirements to get accredited and to get to these benefits in a prudent and rational way for these small and medium enterprises to be able to obtain it. So yes, we see this part as a challenge. We are focusing on as well small, medium enterprises. We're focusing on e-commerce, and we're focusing as well in free trade zones as part of our new strategy on AEOs.
I'm just looking around the room. If you have questions, oh, there we go. Mark, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Deputy Secretary General Trevino. Pleasure to see you again. Mark Kubins from CBP Customs and Border Protection. I was wondering, in your presentation, you mentioned green trade, green commerce, and I think that is something that is relatively new to the WCO. I think a number of years ago it wasn't as prominent on the agenda, so I'd just be curious if you could just say a few words more about what that entails. What does the future hold? Best practices? Are you already collecting those? What are you seeing? And what is the prospect for more work in that area? Thanks.
Thank you. Good to see you as well, Mark, and thank you for joining us. Yes, effectively, this is an emerging trend, a big one, I would say, and we already see some issues, some initiatives already towards green customs. One is the combat for illicit flow of waste. We are identifying and working together with members, organizing joint operations in order to identify operations that are trying to move waste from one country to another in an illegal manner and that are not disposed in a correct way. So this is some of the operations that we're doing. We are also focusing a lot our efforts in combating the trade or the flow of endangered species. We have seen how the number of endangered species of our planet has kept growing, unfortunately, in the last few years, and therefore we see there an opportunity for customs to contribute to this combat of this figure. But we see new trends arising. For instance, circular economy. How can customs contribute to the circular economy? And this is part of the study that we want to perform. As part of the new strategy, we're proposing, first of all, to do a study on how customs can contribute to the greening of supply chains through engaging in circular economies. We are also proposing to organize a first global conference that will be organized in June, actually, just after our council week. A first global conference on green customs, which would allow us to collect best practices from customs administrations on the one hand, but also would allow us to interact with the academy and with the business, so that we can hear and take as well some examples of how customs can contribute to this global effort. So this is the plan. It's an emerging trend. We still need to identify some concrete actions there to really make it much more robust. But I think it's something that future generations will appreciate from us, and it's something that we need to tackle as soon as possible, or else it will come back and bite us. Thank you.
Ricardo, I think a lot of us, when we're not in this room, are thinking about the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and inevitably sanctions do encourage people to try to sanctions bust by falsifying origin or obscuring it. How does this, I mean, I know you can't solve the Ukraine issues, but how does this world of sanctions, sort of the negative side of trade, challenge World Customs Organization members? And are there things that those of us who are in the civilian economy should be conscious of as you take on new missions and new enforcement challenges like that?
Sure. Well, again, of course, sanctions have two-sided effects, and we have to take care of both. And again, I think it's a part of our enforcement tasks to do it in a more effective way. And I would say we need to again leverage on our technological solutions. We are now aiming to update our origin guidelines, for instance, in order to start promoting much more the use of electronic origin certificates. This means that in order for this to work, we need to promote and to adopt technologies based, for instance, on blockchain or artificial intelligence that would allow us to really detect in a much more effective way the illegal goods that we're trying to avoid flowing.
Absolutely. Oh, Andrew, do you have another question?
Go ahead, Chris, if you were getting close to time.
I hate to dominate questioning. It's never a good idea. I wanted to talk a little bit about the gap on technology that we know exists between some of the emerging markets and some of the advanced economies. This comes up in trade all the time. We talk about capacity building, and is it just a question of funding or setting global standards, or are there things that the trade community needs to do to help finance technologies that create greater access? I mean, how does the WCO see that component in kind of narrowing those gaps?
Thank you again, Chris. Well, I'll go back. I showed you in my presentation a slide on a survey that was made by the World Economic Forum, and the WCO participated in this survey regarding the impact of technology in trade. There was another question in this survey which actually talked about that. What are the main challenges to adopt new technologies? And basically, one of them is the cost. The high cost of adopting new technologies. The other one is that there is no global framework and that you would therefore need to adopt technology in different ways because each country has different ways of viewing the implementation of these technologies. The other factor is, of course, the need to upscale the skills of people to operate and to really have a good use of this technology. Therefore, these three main factors are very, very important in adopting the new technologies. From the customs perspective, we also performed a survey which allowed us to see that around 60% of our membership have in place a technology strategy already, and the rest are in process of defining this strategy. This would allow us, of course, within a global framework, to harmonize the efforts and to try to standardize the strategy of technology from our members' perspective. There is an opportunity there, I would say, to lead into the development of a global framework that allows us to use technology in trade, to use technology in customs in a more standardized way. And I think WCO can lead these efforts, of course, with the contribution of members in a given working body.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of our time, and so what I maybe would like to do is encourage you to think about the future. Maybe not 100 years from now, but in the near term. If you were trying to put on our radar screens the kind of things that we should be watching for in the coming years, or where the community outside the customs community, those of us in the private sector and think tanks, could be supportive of the kind of change you see coming, what would you identify? What are some of the trends that you think, being on the inside, we should all be watching?
Well, definitely is constant change. So we need to keep flexible, to keep agile. We need to react quickly to any change that comes. So what I foresee in the coming years is constant change, driven by technology, driven by global emergencies or global situations. So I think what we need to do is try to be flexible and make our decision-making process less bureaucratic and much more pragmatic into adapting and adopting solutions that will allow us to face better these constant changes. That could be, again, a product of any global emergency situation or changing environment due to technology, due to environmental crisis, health crisis, or so on.
I think that's very wise. For a long time, we talked mainly about efficiency in our supply chains, and now the need for agility as well as resilience becomes much more important. I think you've hit that right on the head. I want to thank you very much, Ricardo, for coming and sharing your thoughts with us. I hope you'll come back and keep us updated on the work of the WCO and how we can be helpful. I want to thank my counterpart here, the great Andrew Rudman, and my colleagues in the Canada and the Mexico Institutes for pulling this together. But this isn't just a North American forum, this is a global forum, so I want to thank our wonderful team at Wilson, including our AV team, for pulling this together, and you, the audience that's watching from your screens, both live and in the recorded version. Thank you very much, and we hope to continue this dialogue in years to come.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.